Hello class. In this video, we're going to look at checkbox and radio button controls in Visual Studio. We're going to create a new project. We're going to use the project that is demonstrated in your textbook. And it is the registration app. Let me see where it begins. Towards the bottom of page 630. Now in this application, we're going to be using some checkboxes and some radio buttons. Let's create our new project first. This is going to be a Windows Forms app. I'm going to call it Registration App. I'm going to check my location here, put it where I want it. And then I do have my checkbox checked to add to source control. Look at that example of that awesome checkbox. Now, before I go any further, I'm going to choose my folder for TFS. I want it saved in my practice projects. Make this form a little bit smaller because you know our updates tend to make it increase in size. Before we do that, though, I'm going to rename components. We want to rename form 1. We will name it registration form. And yes, I do want to update all the other components. And everything's gotten renamed properly. Now my program.cs, I want to rename it. And this is going to be my main class. And again, in our main, we're going to just run our registration form. So on our registration form, I'm going to bring up its properties, and I want my text to say something about registration. Let's see what we want here. Try to do it like they want it. Registration form, I could have handled that. And for our form, let's set our back color and things the way we like. You can choose any sort of color that you like. I'm going to go with something a little different than that blue that they like. I think I'll do, how about bisque? Oh, that looks nice. And I think I want my 4 color then to be I'll go with this dark orange or Peru. What do you think, Peru? Saddle brown, that looks good. Now I want to change my font too because I want it to be about 12. I think that'll do well for our form. Now the first thing that we're going to do is choose what we want on our form. Let me show this to you. I can move it over here. Our registration form is going to have the name. We're going to have some checkboxes for the user to select some lessons, and they can have more than one lesson choice. That's why we're using checkboxes. Then we're going to have a group of radio buttons for them to select their current skill level. And of course, because they're radio buttons, they'll be limited to only one choice. After they're done, we'll give them a total for what their cost is going to be for this registration. Okay, so that's kind of what our form is going to look like. I'm going to start with a label, and this label is going to prompt for their name. So the text property, I'll say name. And let's see if they want us to name that. Sorry, it's giving me a lot of wonderful information, but nothing about that one. it doesn't look like we're really going to refer to the name in the text. So we'll just leave that as label 1. And then I'll add a text box. Maybe we'll access it even if the book doesn't. Okay. We'll name this TXT BX name. I'll make it a little bit smaller. That looks good. Now underneath the name, we're going to have 2 different groupings. Our first grouping is going to be our checkboxes, and our checkboxes aren't really related to each other because we don't really care how many checkboxes they pick. So let's label this appropriately. And we want this to say select lesson. And underneath that, I want a checkbox. And then we'll look at how they work. So I'm going to put a checkbox control here. Now a checkbox really has 2 parts, right? It has the box part where you can check, and then it has the description, the text part. So the text part is controlled by our text property. We want this first one to say swim, and swimming is going to add $50. Now, when we are working with a checkbox, we usually name it CHK. We make sure that's how they want it. They are not wanting it that way. They want it to be CKBX swim. So that's an interesting name. Like I told you, we have different standards depending on who we're working for. So with our checkbox, notice some different options that we have. Our most important property in a checkbox and in a radio button is the checked property. And the checked property is false if the object is not checked, is true if the object is checked. So we also have one that's checked state, but it's not a Boolean, so it's a little bit harder to work with. Now, as we look at our checkbox, you could add an image if you wanted to the description of it. And we have some different ways we can use things. This 3-state option is interesting. With a 3-state checkbox, it can be unchecked, partially checked, or fully checked. So we've seen some different things that are like that. Right now we have our text aligned to middle left, which is fine. Here it is, right to left. Let's try changing that option and see what happens. Notice how that switches and moves the text box, or the checkbox, sorry, to the other side of the text. I'll leave it set as no. Okay, so that was our first checkbox. We want another one. So we can copy this one if we like. Control C, Control V. Want this one to be in its text property, snorkel. And snorkeling is going to cost $25. We'll name this control CKBX snorkel. One more, so I'll paste again. Trying to get them kind of even here. Now this third one is going to be dive. I'm at my name property, so I'll change it first. CKBX dive. And then in our text property, we want this to say dive, hyphen, and diving is going to cost $100. Now, as we work with our checkboxes, we can see that they get a little out of whack. So I'm going to use my control key to select all 3 of them. And I'm going to align their lefts. And then I think I'm going to find this one. make same height, and I sort of want them, make vertical spacing equal. That's the one I want. I think they look okay like that. I will move them all a little bit closer to our heading that says select lesson. Now, as we mentioned, each of our checkboxes are completely on their own. We don't care if one is selected or the other is selected or anything along those lines. Let's look at creating some code with these. First of all, we said the checked property was the one that indicates whether the checkbox is checked or not. If you notice in our application, we don't start with any of our checkboxes checked. I want to add code, but I want the same code to execute no matter which one of these gets selected. So I'm going to go add that code myself. So I'm going to view code, and I'm going to add my own method. So this method is going to be private to this class, and I want to call it compute cost, because each of those checkboxes is a cost item. And whenever somebody checks or changes one of those checkboxes, I want this to run. So I'm going to call it a changed event, which would be the event that would be associated with each individual checkbox if they each had their own individual event. Now I have to specify the parameters that are going to be passed. For a changed event, we want an object, our sender, and then our event args. For this method, we're going to set up a decimal variable called cost and initialize it to 0. Now the way we're going to have this method work is we don't care which checkbox they checked because we're going to look at all of them. So we're going to do that with an if statement. And first we're going to see if our swim checkbox is checked. If so, that Boolean will result in a true condition, and we're going to add $50 to our cost. Now, if the checkbox that says we want a snorkel is checked, we want to add to our cost $25. If the checkbox that says they're going to swim is checked, oops, we want dive, right? Sorry. I already did swim. We dive. And if they want to dive, we're going to add 100. Good. That should be our event procedure for our checkboxes. Let's add a comment here. This method will process the activity checkboxes to update the cost. Perfect. Now, after we've got our cost updated, let's display it. And we want to display it after that last if statement is done in our text box result. Oh, we need to add that. My bad. Let's go add that to our form. Just to show you it's not the end of the world if you're missing something. It's going to be a text box. We want it to be down here at the bottom of our form. And it's going to be our txt bx result. Now remember last time we used a text box for our result message. We made the read-only property true, and we made the tap stop false. Now I can go back to my code and finish that. This .txt box result .text We want to set that equal to that cost variable we just calculated. Let's convert that to a string and let's display it in currency format. So we should be able to see the result of this code. Let's run our program. And I'll say that I want to snorkel and dive. Nothing happening. Did we associate our new method with any events? We didn't, did we? So let's go back to our form. And we really want it associated with all three of these checkboxes. So let's select all three of them. And then can we switch to our events window? Yup. And we want the checked changed event. And when that event fires, we want to run our compute cost. Now that should be associated with all three of these checkboxes because we have them all selected as we change that property. So let's run it and test. Swim, 50, snorkel, dive, unselect. We should get back to nothing. Awesome. Works great. So checkboxes. We don't have to worry about grouping them. They're each on their own, but they do each generate their own event. And the event that is the default is the checked changed. And the property that we're usually concerned about is the checked property. Now let's look at radio buttons. Radio buttons are a little different. We need to group them so that the system knows which ones are related to each other, right? Because radio buttons, we can only select one out of a group. So we have a control that allows us to create a group like that, and it's called a group box. So I'm going to place this group box over here. And our group box has a name, and it also has a text property for this title that's being displayed. Somewhere. Oh, what is the problem? Look at that. I'm looking at my events, not my properties. So let me, come on now. Group box, properties. Now, looking at our group box properties, I was getting myself all confused there. I have the text property that allows me to set a heading. Now, this list is going to be different because it's not going to be activities. This is going to be our skill level selection. So we want this text to say something nice like that, skill level, and then we don't have to add a separate label for this group box because it has its own kind of heading. And inside our group box, we want to add our different skill level radio buttons. So I'm going to go find my radio button control, and I'm going to make sure and drop it within that group box. Because if it's outside of the group box, it's not going to be part of the group. This first one is going to say beginner. And I'm going to name this. And let's see what kind of name they want. RAD, beginner. And that looks good. When we look at our radio buttons, they have a lot of the same kind of properties as a group or as the checkbox. So we have our regular alignment, our right to left setting where we can switch the order. We have all of our regular options that most of our controls have. The checked property, again, is the property that we're mostly concerned with. And the checked changed method or event is what we'll be concerned with also. Now I can copy this. Again, I want to select that group box to make sure it goes into that group box. This middle one is going to say intermediate. Is that what they wanted it to say? Yep. And then our intermediate, We want our intermediate to be our default. We're going to go ahead and check that. We've found that most people say that they're intermediate on their forms, so we'll just have it checked already. Our name for this control is going to be RAD, intermediate. Lastly, we need one more. I'm going to paste it. Now, I don't know if that one's in there. I'm going to delete it because I don't like it. We'll copy this one and paste it. And now we know it's in there. Now this is going to be our advanced. So I'll change the text to say advanced. And I'm going to change its name to RAD advanced. And I will change its checked property back to false because we only want that intermediate to start out checked. Let's run and see how it looks. Alrighty, we have our intermediate and advanced, our skill level intermediate already selected. Everything working great. So what we're going to do with our radio buttons is, again, whenever somebody clicks one of them, we're going to be updating something. So let's see how we want to do this. We're going to wire the click event to of our radio button objects. To our same compute cost event that we've already used. How handy is that? Sorry, it took me a second. I was like, what? But we're going to do that for all of these different items. So let's select all three, just like we did before. Go to our events screen, find our checked changed property, and set it to that method. Now we're going to need to add something to that method in our code to handle these radio buttons. So we have here all of our processing that's already in place for our computing the cost. We're going to add in some information for our checkbox things. First of all, up at the top, we're going to clear out a message. Where is that message supposed to go? Let me find it. We know that we've got our cost, but I'm not exactly sure where they wanted the message. They don't really specify, so let's find a good place for it. An extra label object is added to the bottom right to display messages regarding special discounts. Oops, I missed that. So in our form, bottom right down here, we're going to add a label. And we're going to call this label, go back to our properties, LBL. This will be our LBL output. We want to set our text property to be empty. So it's going to be two double quotes together, and that's going to be our label. We need a few more items on our screen. Let's add another label here that says the word total. I'm going to make this a bigger font. Not that big. 14 and bold. And then I want a text box. And we'll make this text box B, something that they haven't told us yet. We can figure it out. Let's make this one be our result. So I'm going to change something. So I'm going to click on this label here and delete it. I apologize. Delete. Then this one down here is going to be something different. So I'm going to delete it. And this here is going to be txt_bx result. So our code will work just fine. We're going to move that total cost into that. Now down at the bottom, we're going to do a label again. And this label is going to be LBL MSG. And that's going to be where we're going to hold our message. And we want its text property to just be empty. Okay. Now notice that label's hard to find, but we could always get to it using this drop down in our properties list. So don't forget, those labels don't really disappear. They just get a little harder to find. Okay, I think I'm ready to go back to our code now. And what we're going to do is clear out our message. Set it to an empty string. And then we're going to process our radio buttons to update that. So let's see, we've got all of our checkboxes here, updating our cost. And when our cost is done, we're putting that into our result text box. Now let's do our radio buttons. If our RAD beginner checked, we're going to add $10 to our cost because we really have a hard time with those beginners. We're going to update our LBL message text value and set it equal to this message. Beginner extra $10 charge. Now if they're not a beginner, they're intermediate or advanced, we're going to do an else clause to figure out what's going on there. So in our else clause, we're going to first check to see if the RAD advanced option is checked. And if so, we're going to subtract $15 from their cost. We're probably going to make them help too, huh? And we'll set our message to let them know. Advanced dash dash discount of $15. Now that's going to end that if statement. Do you notice how everything's a little messed up as far as our curly braces? Because we don't have curly braces for our else. So let's add those, because otherwise it's just going to be a big giant mess. Add that in. Now we can tell that this if is within this else clause, which is much clearer in our code. So now, if it's advanced, we want to subtract $15. We need one more else clause. And for this one, we're just going to set that text to an empty string because our intermediate people don't get any sort of special privileges. Now we can label these think about where they are, what we're ending, because we have a lot of stuff here. What's this green one go to? Oh, that's our method. And then after that is our class and our solution. Now we saw that we have a lot of if statements, a lot of opening and closing curly braces. So this is definitely a good exercise to get really, really good skills with working with those, making sure you have them in the right place at the right time. Let's run our program. Okay, we should be all set now. If they swim, we're saying our cost looks good. If we have a beginner, it didn't add, did it? It is working that I can only select one of the radio buttons at once, but it doesn't seem like my advanced discount and my beginner surcharge are working properly. Let's fix that. The problem is, right here, we're outputting our cost to that text box. But then further on in our code, we're updating that cost again. So we can't do that at this point. I'm going to cut that line of code and I'm going to paste it after we've ended our if statements. So now we will not output our calculated cost until we finish calculating it. Let's run it. Swim, snorkel, dive, beginner. Oh, that word did added. Advanced, it's subtract. Great. I think we still need to put something in about their name. So let's do that. In our text box result, we've got our cost, but in our label message, I think we could add their name. Let's say that we want to take the label message text and we want to reload it completely, and we're going to set it equal to that text box names text property plus whatever the label message text property is when this command starts. Will that work? Let's try it. I'm getting my name down there. Oh, I need to add a space after my name. So let's see, I'm going to say it's my name plus a space plus the label message. Do you want it to say something nice? Let's do it. Let's make it be like, hello, comma, space, Renee. Let's run it. So I'm getting all of my information there. I'm using my checkboxes. Notice how we made that work. We could have had separate event procedures or methods for each of our different changed events, but we were able to create one method and use it for all of these different controls on our form. Radio buttons and checkboxes are very commonly used controls. So again, do experiment with them, do some testing, and see how things work. Thank you.